Andiamo!
Hello everyone and welcome back to another review episode. In this episode, I'll be continuing my chapter on reviewing A Million Little Things by reviewing the first half of Season 4. Before I start my review, make sure to subscribe and like the video as most of you watching have not, and it will be very appreciative if you do. Spoiler warning is in effect, so if you haven't seen the show, I suggest you do, but if you're still watching, thank you for watching. In my opinion, the first half of the season has been pretty solid in its storytelling, but it has been disappointing to see Delilah, portrayed by Stephanie Shojak, leave a role for personal reasons. In the story, the fact that she left for Paris with Danny has been disappointing as the showrunner has promised an arc for Danny, which has not happened as of yet. Overall, the rest of the characters have had a solid arc, allowing for the viewers to cheer on these characters that we have grown fond of over the past 3 seasons. Before I reveal my ranking of the season so far, I'm gonna summarize what happened so far in season 4. Starting off with Eddie, like I did the last video, as you remember, in the montage scene that happened in the last scene of season 3, Eddie gets a phone call from the person that hit him. From this one phone call, Eddie decides to play detective and tracks down the person who hit him. After having a conversation with that said person, Eddie learns to forgive himself and her, allowing him to move on. After the 6-month time jump, Eddie decides to help Sophie with her music endeavors, which was to help her re-audition for the MMI, which was something Peter was doing, and that was a very bad thing that Peter did, and now Eddie has been helping her. During this time, Eddie meets someone special, teasing more to come with Eddie in the future. Catherine. After having a difficult season last season, Catherine decides to move on after meeting her celebrity crush and allowing her to move on and start dating again. Theo. Theo meets his first crush, and in one episode, Eddie helps Theo with the execution of the way to approach on saying that Theo is having a crush on this person, showing how Theo has matured from season 1. Delilah and Danny, as I mentioned, has left for Paris for the foreseeable future. Though Danny does appear through video chats with Sophie, Delilah does not, showing that Danny has more arc as the showrunner promised. Gary. In the final scene of the last season, we see Gary attacking Peter for what he did to Sophie. The show gradually reveals what Gary did to Peter, revealing that though Peter was in a coma, he had an accomplice that did the deed. From this, his past starts to haunt Gary as Darcy starts to suspect something, leading them to break up. This attack also leads Gary to be the number 1 hate list on Sophie as Peter blackmails Gary, leading for the truth out to Sophie. Gary, after the 6-month time jump, starts to start fresh by throwing everything away that built him up to this point. Darcy. As I mentioned, Darcy and Gary breaks up due to some differences as Darcy starts to suspect something dark within Gary. And by the 6-month time jump, she already has gotten back with her ex, leading to her getting pregnant, and Gary questions whether the father is him because of the timing itself. Maggie. Maggie becomes very successful in her podcast endeavors, getting her hired and her assistant to be hired in this podcast company. She also starts to date someone new, which Gary also accepts as he is a very famous person. But some tragic occurs as she starts getting stalked by getting fan mails of creepiness, which leads for some mystery as the person that wrote these fan mails has been dead for a while. Rome and Regina. Rome and Regina spend a longer time apart this season than any other season so far. Regina is offered a gig by Kiana to become a chef at her set, allowing her to pursue cooking like the way she wanted before. While Rome continues to spread his documentary about African Americans and the way they are treated, by the mid-season finale, it is revealed that due to their separation, Rome has gotten worse in his depression. Sophie. Sophie starts to slowly recover from her assault, but the attack on Peter pauses this as she gets worse and worse until the 6-month time jump, and in between, Sophie and Gary breaks ties due to what Gary did. After the 6-month time jump, Sophie requests Eddie to help her with the re-auditioning to MMI. During this endeavor, Sophie gets an apology from Anna, Peter's ex-wife, who was in denial of Peter's actions, but after learning the truth, the two are able to bond and heal. Sophie, after getting into MMI, decides to not go to MMI and join a band, which is something that is teased for the foreseeable future. Now, let's move on to the top 8 episodes, as there is only 8 episodes so far of this season. Number 8, Not the Plan, Episode 2. Though in my opinion, most of these episodes are great, some of these episodes, like this one, felt like a fill-in episode. This episode especially felt like a fill-in episode where every character was going anywhere and it was sometimes hard to follow. The episode covers so many things in this one episode. It's like what happened to Peter in small snips of flashbacks, Maggie's podcast career and being with her coworkers, and also Catherine having a play date with Shanice, and the fact that she's a huge fan makes it quite entertaining at points. Eddie being a detective, it had lots of things that were really good, except for the fact that they were bunch jumbled together, which made it a little bit confusing in my opinion. Some of these episodes are the same like these, but the way that are executed for this one felt a little bit disappointing in my opinion. Number 7, Crystal Clear, episode 5. This episode has felt a little bit rushed in my opinion due to the time jump that happens in the next episode, which is understandable and yet slightly disappointing to not see some of these storylines play out even longer. But the good part about this episode is the fact that there are two arcs that has been brewing since season 3 that has been concluded. The first one being Gary being blackmailed by Peter after being attacked by after Gary attacking Peter, and Peter is threatening to expose Gary, which in turn connects this storyline into Sophie and Maggie, as Sophie and Maggie did the podcast in the final episode of season 3, and Peter is asking for it to be taken down. And this is the final stretch Sophie has with Gary, and their relationship are strained up to this 8th episode so far, I guess. The second part of this episode that had the conclusion was the Eddie and Nicole, the person that hit him, answer basically. The fact that Nicole and Eddie is able to work things out instead of Eddie being angry at Nicole for hitting him and putting him into a wheelchair is very understandable. And the fact is, Eddie is able to move on and forgive the person that hit him, showing how compassionate he can be at points. Another new arc that starts in this episode, or has been starting since episode 2, is Catherine's sexuality change, as Catherine has been dating men until up to this point, starting with Eddie and then Alan. Now, instead of that, Catherine for one day have a date with Shanna, and the fact is, Catherine is still ashamed of this because of the fact that her mother is very cultural and the fact that Catherine might not want it to be like that. So Catherine decides to play it slow, but by the end of the episode, we see Catherine happy and share a kiss with her first date, I guess. Overall, this episode is very solid and yet very fast in my opinion, which is why this is on number 7. Number 6, Pinocchio, episode 4. This episode was very disappointing at points in my opinion because of the fact that Darcy and Gary broke up by the end of the episode. This is extremely sad because Gary and Liam's relationship was very up to a point of fatherhood from season 3 up to now because of the fact that they have bonded and they are now very close to each other. It is sad to see them part ways because the two broke up. This episode also was because of Gary, in my opinion, because his past starts to haunt him as Peter wakes up and is now able to communicate with the detective about what happened. This makes Gary really frightened about what happened and is one of the main key reasons that they break up. The other storyline that was very interesting for me because I support Eddie's storyline in any way as possible is Eddie is finally able to meet the person that hit him in a more conversational way because he didn't meet this person in the third episode. I will discuss that when I get to that. But the fact is, Eddie is finally able to talk to the person that hit him, and Eddie's able to understand what she was going through. And by the end of the next episode, he is able to forgive her for what she did, which is very impressive for Eddie. And the fact that at first this person hands Eddie lots of cash, and then by the end of the next episode, becomes more close or is forgiving and returns the money shows how much strength Eddie has. Number 5, 6 months later, episode 6. Most of the time, I do not like time jumps because it is sometimes frustrating to not know what happened in between these characters during those time jumps. But this was a really nice way of moving on these characters that has been going through their lives in the past 5 episodes, and we can see them grow or stay as they were. And it is interesting to see how each of the characters grew up or stayed the same, I guess. In my opinion, the main changes that happen is when Gary discovers Darcy's pregnant, and Gary thinks at for one moment that the father is Gary, but it is revealed that it isn't, which is um nice. But the fact is, Gary is a little bit disappointing with that because he could have been the father, and as he wanted kids, as mentioned in the last season. So the fact is, Gary is very disappointed and decides to go on a ride along with this broke teenager to suppress his hurt emotions, basically. The other main storyline that is in this episode, though all of the characters appear, or most of the characters appear in some capacity to a point to show what happened to their characters, the biggest one, other than Gary and Darcy, is Eddie and Sophie, as Sophie has been depressed and has gone on a spiral when Gary has done this thing of attacking Peter and leading to them going a little bit, leading to Sophie having a strained relationship with Gary. So the fact that Eddie is able to clean up Sophie's action and decides to help Sophie with the power of music and help her re-audition for MMI is very impressive. Number 4, Stay, episode 7. This episode is very well constructed within the story-wise aspect where there are two main storylines that play along while there are small snippets of other storylines that are weaved into these episode. The first storyline that is in the episode is Sophie and Eddie's relationship and how Eddie is helping Sophie for her audition for the MMI, and the fact that Eddie is trying to help Sophie is something that's nice to see because Sophie has been a little bit fragile and broken by the end of the prior to the 6 month time jump. Sophie has been in the worst possible place that she could be in, and now the fact that Eddie is trying to rebuild her is very nice. Though this is the case, Eddie does meet Anna, Peter's ex-wife, and the fact that Sophie also meets Anna because Eddie decides to invite Anna to the performance of Sophie at this cafe. It makes it a little bit hard, and in this one point, we really think that Sophie is gonna break even more, and that Eddie is the next catalyst to this brokenness. But the fact is, Anna is there to apologize, which makes Sophie heal a little bit more, which we'll see in the next episode, which I'll talk in a bit, so stay tuned. the other storyline that happens is Catherine deciding to embrace her new sexual orientation and have a start dating again. And but the fact is, she's been out of the game way too long, and she's having some difficulties. So instead of that happening, you know, she decides to have a drink with her assistant, who is also gay. And the fact is, Catherine is trying to understand what she is right now, and it's a really interesting arc for her to going through. And hopefully, she gets happy by the end of that season, or maybe in the next season. I don't know. But I hope she gets happy by the end. Number 3, Game Night, Episode 3. This episode was very well contained with one big storyline that occurred in the beginning of the episode, which leads for multiple storylines, which made it a little bit more easier to follow than any other episode. And the fact is, this episode was brilliantly crafted, in my opinion. This episode is basically about how Catherine is being thrown a divorce party while the guys are trying to distract our friend Eddie from finding out. And the truth is, it's a little bit difficult, but you know, there are some distractions that happen that allows this story to go into a nice format. And the main story, tiny story arc that I loved in this episode is Theo actually becoming one step closer to becoming a little bit more of a man than this cute kid that he has been for the past 3 seasons. Theo finally, when he meets Kiana last episode in episode 2, Theo has become a little bit like a stalker or has his first crush, and basically Eddie decides to help um with this aspect and help Theo prepare to tell Kiana what to tell her about the fact that she he likes her. And the fact is, Eddie's very supportive. Instead of making fun of Theo like most parents do, Eddie decides to help Theo with this endeavors and decides to go shopping for some material. But this is when something interesting happens, where Eddie finally meets the woman that hit him. But instead of confronting the woman that hit him, um, he decides to ignore this situation for now and decides to help Theo. He has the compassion and the patience to wait to confront, like we have in the next episode and the next 2 episodes, I guess. What happens, showing that Eddie is a little bit more restrained and he is a father first and an angry man, which is very nice to see because last season he was the opposite, where he smashed the person's car instead of being the father that he could have been. Number 2, Family First, Episode 1. Yes, I don't think it's a surprise that this one or the mid-season finale was either going to be number 1 or number 2. And the main reason why this episode is not in number 1 is the fact that it is not revealed what happens to Gary and Peter by the end of by the beginning of this episode or by the end of the episode, which is fine, but it was a little bit slow in my opinion. It could have, and the fact that they're blood makes it a little bit scary for the fact that what Gary did to Peter is very significant. The other reason why this episode is not number 1 is the fact that Delilah is leaving. It's a very nice going party where everyone is together, and the fact is everyone is saying goodbye to Delilah, and also the actress Stephanie Shojak, because she is not gonna be a regular season regular in season 4. And the fact is, it is a nice goodbye, but it is sad to see her go away, and I hope to see her in the future. This episode also makes Gary a little bit more suspicious of everything, as he has done something that's bad that we have no idea until the next episode when he gets into a coma. And the fact is, it is really a suspicion that driving this character at this episode in this episode, and it's kind of very frustrating in my opinion. This episode also starts the arc of Eddie becoming a detective, trying to find out who on earth hit him. But this is a smaller arc than the others, and we learn by the end of the episode that Gary was not alone in um, hitting him or in Peter's assault, and that there was someone else in with Gary, and it's a very good teaser to have for foreseeable episodes, which was really the case. Number 1, The Things We Keep Inside, Episode 8. This episode was very well done in my opinion, where we have Sophie's MMI audition and Gary getting closure and forgetting and moving on from his past from Darcy and Maggie, and we see that happening throughout the episode. Eddie's helping Sophie with the MMI audition is very well done, as Sophie feels more confident now that she has met Anna and gotten an apology, but while auditioning for MMI, she gets this panic, and the fact that she's able to deal with this panic of knowing that Peter sat right across the room when she first met Peter was a very dark time for her, but she was able to move on, which is very nice. The other part is Gary moving on from his past, mainly Darcy, where Gary walks home and Liam is in the house, broken into the house, and Gary is able to convince Liam that it is okay to be imperfect and that it wasn't his fault that he and um, Liam's father is able to convince um, Liam that it wasn't his fault that Darcy's in the hospital because she is pregnant and and pregnant people does in sometimes get injured before their pregnancy. The episode also teases a lot of things for that's to come, such as Eddie's relationship with Anna and the fact that they're gonna try a relationship. Also, um, Maggie's relationship with Gary is also being tested, as Gary is trying to forget everything about his past and move on from his past, but that's the one thing that is impossible to do because Gary and Maggie has this connection, and it is a little bit of a storyline that is to come in the foreseeable episodes, hopefully. The other one is Rome's depression, and the fact is, Rome has been keeping it together inside himself, as the title says, and he has gone to the point of no return, I guess, where due to the fact that Rome and Regina has been separated for the at most of these seasons so far, Rome has been trying to keep it together, but he is honest to Regina, which is very nice to see. The other part is Sophie does get into MMI, but instead of going into MMI, Sophie does try out to become a part of a band, and it is nice to see that Sophie is trying to move on from her past and reach out to do something, and instead of doing something destiny is calling, she is trying to create her own destiny, which is a nice thing to see. Thank you for watching this review episode. I know it is a little bit weird with my opinions and all, but I will be trying this method for a little while and see if you guys like it. So if you still haven't subscribed and if you are still listening to this video or watching this video, I am very appreciative of this. So if you can comment down below on your favorite episode of this season so far if you have seen it, or you could give a like and share it with your friends. That would be very appreciative. And make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next time for another review episode.